Look at the economic rise of Taiwan, South Korea, or Singapore, and you'll notice that they don't follow the classic Western playbook of free markets. Instead, they follow what they call the Asian model or the development state. In the West, the idea that the government sets the rules, but in this Asian model, based on Taiwan's history, the government acts like the pilot of an airplane. It's not just a passenger, and it doesn't own the whole airline like communism would, but it's definitely the steering towards the destination. In Taiwanese state looked at the economy and said, we're not just going to sell and make the cheap goods, we are going to target semiconductors, we're going to target high technology. So yes, it is a distinct model, it's a partnership, but the state is very much involved in the process. So how do they actually do it? It involves a three-step cycle: the planning, the building, and the spinning off. First, the planning. The government identifies a crucial industry. In the 1970s, Taiwan realized it was just a contract manufacturer. It had no deep tech of its own. So bureaucrats decided that the future was to go towards the semiconductors. Second, the building. Private companies couldn't afford the risk, so the state built the capability itself. They created a research institute called the ITRI. It is like a government-funded tech incubator. They spent nearly $10 million to license the technology from the US, and then they sent Taiwanese engineers to America to train for a year. The state was the one that covered all the costs. And third, the spinning off. Once the technology was mastered, the state didn't keep it a secret. It used the knowledge to create private companies. First, they created the UMC, and then they lured Maurice Chang from Texas Instruments to run a new venture, the TSMC. The government provided nearly the half of the startup money, and then lured other wealthy business owners into investing. So how does it work? It works through risk absorption. The state takes the scary, expensive first step so that the private industry can run for itself later on. So is it really even capitalism? This is the most important question. If the government is picking the winners and funding the factories, can we still call it capitalism? The answer is yes, but it's not the common type of capitalism. It's not socialism, because in socialism the state owns everything forever. In Taiwan, the goal was always to create the private companies that compete globally, like TSMC. It is a profit-driven company that sells chips to Apple, Nvidia, and all through the world. It succeeded because it was efficient, and that's capitalism. However, it's not the usual type of capitalism of the 19th century. It is what you might call the state-led capitalism. The state acts as the venture capitalist and the strategic planner because the private sector was too weak to take the first leap. It is ironic because the reason this case is called the twilight of the development state is that this model worked too well. Taiwan created a giant like TSMC and a wealthy democracy, but now the government can't just give orders anymore. Their parliament argues and the politic gets in the way.
So now I, Maria Jose Tinjaca, will be answering question number 2, which is, can Taiwan maintain its economic success and a more pluralistic government at the top of the technology arc? First, very briefly, I will give some context here. Taiwan used to be an authoritarian state after 1949. During that period, the government strongly directed the economy. It guided investments, supported key industries, and built institutions like ITRI. This strategy helped Taiwan grow very fast, as we see in Exhibits 2 and 3, with strong GDP growth, export expansion, and industrialization. Later, Taiwan became a democracy, and that change raises an important doubt. Can a democratic system still support long-term economic success, especially in a highly competitive technology industry? So, let's focus directly on the answer. In my view, yes, Taiwan can maintain its economic success, however, it must adapt to new realities. So, first of all, democracy does not automatically weaken economic performance. In fact, democracy can strengthen innovation. When a country has rule of law, transparent institution, and protection of property rights, companies feel more secure investing long term. Innovation depends on trust, contracts, and a stable institution. Taiwan indeed has all of this. Moreover, at the top of the technology arc, success depends less on cheap labor and on knowledge, research, and talent. Open and pluralistic societies are often better at attracting global talent and encouraging creative thinking. For example, Taiwan's semiconductor ecosystem led by the TSMC depends highly on educated engineers and global partnership. That type of innovation environment works well in democratic systems. At the same time, Taiwan's dominance in semiconductors gives it an strategic power. As shown in the case on Exhibit 5, Taiwan produces a majority share of advanced chips. During the COVID-19 shortage, the world realized how dependent it is on Taiwanese manufacturing. This creates what some call like a silicon shield, the idea that Taiwan's economic importance increases its global relevance. However, there are real risks. The main challenge is not democracy itself, but geopolitics. The US-China rivalry, export controls, and policies like the CHIP Act are reshaping what are global supply chains nowadays. This means Taiwan must manage external pressure very carefully. Therefore, Taiwan's future success depends on three key factors. First, it must continue investing heavily in R&D and advanced manufacturing to remain technologically ahead. Second, it must diversify its economy. While semiconductors are a strength, overdependence on one sector could increase vulnerability. Third, it must maintain strong international alliances. In international business, it is very important because Taiwan must remain indispensable to its major partners. So to conclude, Taiwan's challenge is not whether democracy allows growth or not. The real question is whether Taiwan can stay innovative and strategically connected in a world that is becoming more fragmented. And that question is not only about Taiwan, but about the future of globalization itself.
My name is Natalia. The first concept I'm going to explain is globalization of production. This concept refers to how companies divide their production process across different countries to reduce cost, access specialized skills, and improve efficiency. Instead of producing everything in one country, production is spread around the world. In Taiwan case, this concept is especially important in the semiconductor industry. Taiwan became part of the global production network when it started manufacturing electronic components and later advanced at semiconductor international companies. At the beginning, foreign, especially American firms, transferred technology to Taiwan, and local engineers were trained to develop domestic productions. Over time, Taiwan introduced a revolutionary business model through the TSMC called a pure foundry model. This means the company does not design its own chips. Instead, it manufactures chips that are designed by other global technology firms. This model became essential for the globalization of production in the tech industry. It allowed companies around the world to outsource their most complex and expensive manufacturing process to Taiwan. The results were remarkable. Before the pandemic, Taiwan was producing 60% of the world's logic chips and more than 90% of the most advanced semiconductors. So this shows how Taiwan became a central player in global supply chains. Now the second concept is political and economic system. In simple terms, this means how a country's government and how its economy is organized. These two things have a big impact on how a country grows and develops. For a long time, Taiwan was ruled by Kuomintang under an authoritarian system. This means the government had a lot of power and could make important economic decisions without much opposition. However, Taiwan did not become a communist economy. Instead, it followed a mixed system. The government played an active role in guiding the economy, creating important industries and investing in the technology. Later, many of these industries were managed by private companies, and one important example was the creation of the Industrial Technology Research Institute, which helped building a country's technological knowledge and later supported companies like TSMC. Over time, Taiwan was a strong economic growth, helping improve living conditions and eventually lead to a transition toward democracy. This supports the idea that economic growth can help promote political change. So, overall, Taiwan economic success was not just luck, it was the result on how its political and economic systems were organized and how they challenge over time, helping other countries to become a key part of global production.
My name is Simon Rodriguez, and I'm going to talk about how some factors seen in the class theory can explain the economical growth of Taiwan. So first of all, I'm going to talk about geography. So basically, Taiwan it's an island, like surrounded by the ocean. So it has a lot of advantage in terms of moving goods across this ocean, and like that's very beneficial for their commerce. They are next to China, so they control like all the South and Northeast Asia, a part of the world. In terms of positioning, they are very strategical. They have like a very strategical point in the world, and a lot of countries in the world have tried to conquer this island because of that. And also, theory says that coastal economies have lower transportation costs and also have easier integration into global trade networks. So that's obviously an advantage that made Taiwan like very important in terms of like global in the global economy. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the investment in education and in human capital, basically. So what they did was that they invested a lot of money into education. They made 9 years of school free to everybody in the country, and that helped a lot because 1.1 million people that studied grew into 4.5 million people studying in the country. So they were like investing a lot in people having education and being specialized. Also, they made this education like technology oriented. So they were creating the future workers of like a technological world. And also related with this, they sent engineers into some companies in the US in order to learn about semiconductors. And semiconductors are very important because with semiconductors you create microprocessors, and as theory says, microprocessors were the best and most crucial like invention after World War II. So what they did, and it's my last point, is that they kind of monopolized this technology. They learned about it and they brought it to Taiwan, and they started to make like semiconductors and like, I don't know if monopolized, but center like the production in Taiwan. So as the case says, 60% of 60% of semiconductors were made in Taiwan, and 90% of high-end semiconductors were also made in Taiwan. So they had like a very centered, like the industry was very centered in Taiwan, like that's a fact. And these three factors, each one related to each other, made like Taiwan have a lot of advantage to the world. And well, later they had problems because the rest of the world were not happy with Taiwan having almost all the production. But that's another topic. Like the 3 points I made earlier were like the things I wanted to show, like geography, education, and like kind of monopolizing the market were three very important factors for Taiwan to succeed.
In Chapter 3, Hills explains that the country's economic development depends on the quality of the institutions. Institutions can include the legal system, protection of property and rights, public policies, government structure, and political stability. When institutions are strong, they create trust, attract investment, and allow long-term economic growth. Institutions and economic development can apply in the case of Taiwan case in the way that the case shows that Taiwan growth was not accidental, is because they have well and strong design institutions. The government create clear industrial policies, strategic sectors such as technology were protected. There was a strong investment in education and human capital, and there were close coordination between the governments and the companies. They have like well communication. So, because of these institutions, Taiwan became a global leader in semiconductors. However, the case also shows the globalization puts pressure on these institutions. For example, increase in international competition, geopolitical tensions with China, and changes in traditional role of the state.